Jill, could you put the agenda back up, please? Thank you. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. With that, I would like to call the meeting to order. I'd like to call to order the Whatcom County's Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force Steering Committee for March, March 10th, 2022. It's 11:03 a.m. and we're meeting virtually. So good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here this morning. We will go to our first item, which is an update on the Justice Project and the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. I had planned to have a bunch of stuff here to read to you, but we lost power in the courthouse last night and things aren't quite working correctly. I was able to get on this meeting, luckily. But anyway, I will give you an update. Oh, thanks, Jackie. They gave me some of it. So anyway, we're preparing now for SAC meeting number 2. SAC meeting number 1 was back in January, in which we just kind of laid out the landscape and everything that's going on. We heard from the sheriff, the prosecutor. We talked about our process that we're running here. From that, we started really digging into how we were going to form the teams to get the actual work done. So we formed the first team that was formed was the data work group led by Caleb and Dr. Alexis Harris from the University of Washington. We've been working now, we've had 2 or 3 meetings now, Caleb, and we have another meeting today. We're meeting weekly to put together the SAC meeting number 2, which will be all about criminal justice data and how we integrate data and just some of those questions we have on what data do we have, what data do we not have. We made some pretty good strides, I think, in our last meeting. Caleb, did you get the email I sent out last night? Okay, because I wasn't sure if everything was working. Marty really fleshed out a lot of the details in what we've been talking about and started constructing a PowerPoint, just a framework. And I think it's pretty well organized. And I think today we'll be able to use that as a tool to keep moving forward in our preparation for SAC meeting number 2. The other thing that took place, if you remember correctly, last steering committee meeting, we talked about utilizing the subcommittee structure of the IPRTF as a conduit to the SAC for members to be able to actually sit in on some of your committee meetings. So we begin to schedule those. I believe the first one that's happening is March 15th next week, which is the behavioral health and law and justice joint meeting. So that's a good meeting for those folks to attend. At that particular meeting, they'll be in listen mode only, but there's going to be follow-up meetings with those 2 co-chairs, or actually before co-chairs for those 2 committees after that March 15th meeting, so they can have a one-on-one, more interactive session with those committee co-chairs, so they can ask questions and follow up on things that they learned on March 15th. So we're going to be doing that as well for the behavioral health gap analysis team that's being formed now. I know Perry, you're part of that. Erica, I think, is helping lead it. And that's being formed. I think we may have our first meeting next week, next Wednesday. So that's been preparation for SAC meeting number 3. So that's kind of the work structure that we're trying to implement to get the most out of the experience and knowledge that we have as IPTRF members, and then using obviously the community members that we have assigned to the SAC to help us formulate this needs assessment. So a few of the other things, the planning team, which is myself and Jack and Stephen, are working with our consultant, Crossroads Consulting, and some of our staff folks. Jill's have been involved a little, and Kathy Halka's involved in helping us keep it staffed. And we meet every Friday, and we talk about how we're implementing the various work products that are coming out of these work groups and helping guide the process to form those agendas for the SAC meetings. So that's what I have for you today, and be happy to answer any questions.
If I may, it's not a question directly, Barry, it is a little comment I just wanted to share with everybody, is that lately we had a problem with the elevators at the jail. And then there were some press reports and things about that. What I'm trying to get at is this notion in our community that somehow this justice facility, or for lack of anything, the jail is somehow sheriff's problem or sheriff's doing, or it's a sheriff's Taj Mahal. It's not. It is a darn county's responsibility. Sheriff doesn't build jails. It is county executive and county council's responsibility to provide him a proper facility. If I build a building say planning development services or public works or health department, this is not health department director's prerogative to say that, oh, this is the kind of building I want. This is a need, this is a requirement, this is a county infrastructure. So I did write a couple of comments on whatever time I got. One was on Northwest Citizen thing. And oh, look, the sheriff is making elevators an excuse to build a new jail. I think we must really look into these things as well, and let the responsibility be where it belongs. This is the wrong rhetoric the community has taken up as last 8 or 10 years, and we are making the very people we want to help, we are making them suffer, and we have increased their sufferings, and we have not taken care of the sheriff corrections deputies. They are in jail for 10 years. Those people come in for 6 months, they leave. The correction deputies never leave. What about them? What about our responsibility as a community to provide them a proper place to work in? What about the criminals? People are all talking about is people on behavioral health, people on this charge or that charge. I think that this is a discussion I would like to have and clarify some of these things. It's important that we should look after the people of behavioral and people who are in small drugs. They should not be in jail. The poor people should not be in jail. But that doesn't mean that there are no people who should be in jail. There are people who should be in jail. And we need that facility. So I don't know. I know I may be upsetting some people here. Not here, I mean in the community. I mean, this is a forum for our discussion. But I think we need to take up the right thing. This is a county infrastructure is crumbled. All I'm saying is we need a new building for current jail. This is a county responsibility to build a proper building for a proper function. We can't build a hospital in tents. That will be not acceptable to us to have a health hospital and let's put up some tents because it costs so much or for one reason or the other reason. I think that that is I just wanted to share my perspective. I see many hands up. Let's hear them as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Arlene?
You're
Can't hear
muted.
you.
I mean, I don't blame you and the sheriff for feeling offended by the idea that this is one person's responsibility, but you're not suggesting that the sheriff doesn't have the power to make things happen when he wants them to happen, are you?
Yes, I am suggesting that the sheriff is not the only person. Sheriff does not have that much authority as people have perceived to be. I think that's a very wrong notion that sheriff can change the building design and how much money need to spend and how much rooms have to be done. The county council, people should go to the county council and say, we want 100 beds or 5,000 beds. It's not the sheriff. The wrong emphasis has been put on and wrong information has taken up by people. They really believe the sheriff directs how many rooms there should be. Sheriff has a contribution. Sheriff has a big say. But when we do a jail design, there's a design people who tell what the code for building a jail is. That code is followed. How many rooms? This committee has been formed last 4 years, has done an excellent work, what kind of jail we should need. But we don't want to keep going back to this for last 15 years. What has been going on? So sheriff has a role. If there are 10 votes, sheriff has 1 vote in that out of 10.
Yeah, the community doesn't see it the way you're describing it. And, you know, it's difficult to measure how much power a person has, but it doesn't seem to me that there's anyone more powerful than the sheriff in decision-making in this county. And this is not to blame, but to describe how things get done or can get done. So if maintenance has not happened, there, you know, do we need to investigate this? I don't think so. We need to just take care of it.
Arlene, respectfully, I think that this is a wrong notion people believe. This is just a belief, it's not reality. The sheriff can do whatever he wants to do.
I'm not
totally
saying.
wrong.
Okay, guys, we're getting a little off topic here.
Sorry.
I understand where everybody's coming from, and that's kind of why we exist and why this process exists, is we're trying to show the public and legitimately show the public that we have far deeper cares about the services we provide in our criminal justice system. So I think, you know, Arlene's right in saying that perception is reality, and that is what the community thinks right now. And it's our job over the next 18, 19 months to be able to get a good message across that we need this for the humane treatment of the folks that go in, a humane place for people to work in, and services that help people that shouldn't be in jail. And, you know, identifying the difference between the ones that do and don't. So that's what, you know, we're trying to achieve through this process. So I agree with both Arlene and St. Paul, but it's something that we have to move the community together with us forward. So it's a big job.
Yes, we haven't yet communicated our accomplishments on this task force to the community. We're still talking about doing it, but it needs to, you know, it definitely needs to happen. They're out there without the information and then making up their own ideas from what a little bits of pieces of information they can get. So it is the county's responsibility to inform the public about what we have done or what we haven't done and why. But
Mhm.
there is no communication that I see going on. And
Well-
so as a result, you'll get this kind of making it up.
Right after this meeting, we are going to be discussing our results to the RFP for the communications specialist. Tyler Schroeder and myself and Jack and Stephen are the kind of the selection committee. So we'll be talking about that. We are moving forward on that as fast as government allows, as they would say. So, Jack?
I got my days messed up. Is that one today after, or is it at SAC, the RFP discussion? Is it after today? Or?
Today, after this steering committee.
Okay, I was confused on that. I wanted to say that, let me lower my hand. All right. I appreciate the comments by Executive Sadhu. It reminded me of what Executive Lau's often said too. This is a county issue. And I think that does get lost. As I was thinking of why the community might think that, in part, you know, when the ballot initiatives were out there, different county officials, the executive, the sheriff, the prosecutor were, you know, on flyers supporting a certain position. But I think it's a mistake to think the sheriff won't support other positions. I found Sheriff Elfo to be very supportive of anything reasonable that protects the community, that's effective at protecting his staff and at making sure we have a humane criminal justice facility that treats people decently. I particularly appreciated the comment today, though, Executive Sadhu, I hadn't thought about in a while the reality of the staff working in what I would characterize as a decrepit, unsafe facility. And you're right, other people leave, the staff are stuck there. I think we need to communicate that. And the last thing I'll say is we could all talk about this for a long time, is being in this planning group with SAC, I will take the insight that we were given today and really try to go with that. Arlene and I probably will have to respectfully disagree on the communication. I believe that while it could always be better, we've been very transparent. The task force has integrity. People can read our minutes, they can come to our meetings. My experience with people is many would rather complain than really get into the facts. And I don't know that spending hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars communicating what we've done will change closed minds that just have their own perspective. I agree we could do better, but I don't know that the solution to changing the perspective of the community is incumbent entirely on the county. I think some of that's on individuals that want to raise their own consciousness or educate themselves, because the resources are here now. So that would be my input on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. Raylene?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sadhu, for your comments. I greatly appreciate them. And I think the frustration levels are countywide on so many different levels. The strategic communications for our group as well as for the new jail is going to be very important in the future, because we need the voters to understand it is a county issue and we need a positive vote. And from the court's perspective, there's 8 purposes of a court: individual justice in individual cases, appearance of individual justice in individual cases, provision of a forum for legal disputes, protection of individuals against arbitrary use of government power, formal record of legal status, a deterrent to criminal behavior, rehabilitation of people convicted of a crime, and separation of some convicted people from society. And when it comes to the deterrent and the separation and the rehabilitation, we're lacking in that. And due to COVID and the jail's current standards, not because of Sheriff Elfo, not because of those working there, but because they're in a decrepit building that should have been replaced 30 years ago. It's falling apart. And what I'm seeing in the courts and what I'm seeing from the officers is frustration. I had a judge that came into court as an attorney yesterday and said he doesn't know what he's doing on the bench anymore. Our judge was questioning what he's doing, as 3 individuals that failed to appear for their first appearances ended up with warrants. One of those individuals, it was his 4th DUI that he failed to appear for on arraignment. He had 6 misdemeanor warrants for driving without ignition interlock, and jail couldn't book them. They didn't have the space. the COVID has caused issues. And this is, you know, that there was 3 individuals that were supposed to be here on arraignment. All of them were basically laughing at law enforcement because they knew that they weren't going to be booked into jail. So Mr. Sidhu, you're correct. There are people that need to be separated from society, that are a danger to others. And we hopefully are doing our best in trying to move forward in communicating and letting others know that this new jail provision will go through. Thank you.
Thanks, Raylene. Stephen?
Thanks, Barry. This is an important conversation. And I just want to reiterate something I've said before about the SAC process. If you look at our public policy debates from the national level down to the local, the trend now is to create a controversy and let that sidetrack what the real issues are. And I think if we buy into A, it's the sheriff's fault, or B, maybe we don't need a new jail, or C, what I've said to the SAC group, that this is a jail planning group, I think we've gone off track. And I think we need to keep our minds on the fact that we're taking puzzle pieces and trying to fit together a comprehensive system. The jail is just one part of those. And I think we err if we talk about this as jail planning, or if we let the conversation, in whatever form it takes, focus on the jail. It does not focus on the jail. It should not. It should focus on the programs that we are working on to divert and treat. Those programs need expansion. A lot of similar programs need to be built to fill gaps. And the jail will be a piece of that, a necessary piece of that. But who's responsible for the current jail, or whether we should repair or replace the current jail, is not the question. And we should not let ourselves allow the question to be framed in that way. It should be a system development question. That's what the ballot initiative ought to look like. And I'm hoping that's what the recommendations coming out of the SAC group and the Justice Project will be, that goes to the ballot. It'll be a comprehensive package of services that provide, yes, incarceration, but more so alternatives to incarceration that can stop the cycling that has gone on for decades.
That's absolutely the mission, Stephen. You described it perfectly. We are looking for a holistic, systematic approach to our criminal justice systems. Caleb?
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate all the comments here as well. I think that it's important to, for me at least, to say I appreciate what Executive Sidhu was saying. For me, I mean, I work for the Sheriff's Office. I am, in a position where I'm literally right now, as we speak, in this facility that we've talked about here this morning. And this is my day, right? This is my day. There are no windows. There's no natural light. It's a debilitatingly frustrating building to work in. That all of that stuff aside, I have chosen a position of advocacy for the people who are incarcerated here. I've chosen a position of advocacy for the staff who work here. That includes all of the contract staff, mental health staff, nursing staff, kitchen staff, because they're all in this together with us. And when I talk about advocacy, I'm not talking about advocacy in terms of people that I occasionally see on the street as I'm driving by. I'm talking about people that are right outside of my office, and this is impacting their lives. And so while all of the concepts that we talk about are potentially near and dear to everybody here, they're very close to my reality. And so what I'm hoping for in this circumstance and in all of the things that I'm trying to stay involved with is that my voice is simply a voice of advocacy, and that people can listen to what I have to say as part of the discussion. I've worked for the sheriff, and I think the sheriff does a good job, again, of advocating for, the people who are incarcerated, for the criminal justice system as a whole, for legal reform, for, a recognition of the effects that this particular or these particular decisions have on correction staff. And so all of that stuff's playing in my mind. But I want to stay focused on, like you guys are saying, this isn't just a jail issue. This affects everybody in our criminal justice system. And in other formats, we've talked about having really a large pool of people who are interacting with EMS service, emergency department service, behavioral health services in the community, and having interaction with the jail facilities as well. And to the best possible end, I'd like to see that we cast a wide net in this discussion and say, what are we actually doing in this landscape to affect change? And how effective are those changes? And that brings me back to, our discussion about data, which Councilmember Buchanan mentioned earlier. We talk about data and we stay focused on what does the data actually say? What does it mean? Because we're not going to make informed decisions for the future of Whatcom County unless we understand really what's happening in our existing criminal justice system. And then lastly, and I'll shut up because I know I've been on a soapbox for a while, but we have to take account that Whatcom County, the jail itself, is the most secure mental health facility in Whatcom County. We don't turn people away for mental health reasons. We don't turn people away for behavioral health reasons. And until we recognize that that is the current status, we're not going to be able to move forward in a future that plans anything better for the population that's currently affected by those issues. And again, I'll step back, but I have a lot to say on this, but I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Caleb. Executive Sadhu.
Barry, I won't take too long. I know the meeting is for them, but since this is started, I just wanted to add another piece of information. Just today morning, we had a meeting on the alternate response team. We got 2.3 or $4 million. Alicia Rule worked so hard to get this money for us for alternate response team. And this is, like we talked grace and we talked lead, and we have actually now formed a team, and county is taken responsibility. And I'm thankful to the council. We took it to the council 2 meetings ago, and council approved $2 million also. So all these things we are doing for the, like everybody said, jail is just one piece of this whole puzzle. And other things are getting done. Other things are getting done. So we just had a meeting with the city today, and we are starting a pilot. Like, we're gonna start tomorrow to start hiring people. It takes like 4 months, 5 months to hire people these days. So it may take us this midsummer that we might be able to put the team together. But this is getting done, and this is permanent. That will take, this is the thing, work from the IPRTF is the work which has resulted in alternate response team. That is a transformational in our whole justice system. Thank you.
The alternate response team is a key, crucial pathway to change of the criminal justice system.
Oh, yes.
Because it starts to relieve the mental health issues from law enforcement, which they don't want in the first place.
Yeah.
We know this because we work with the law enforcement officers all the time, and they don't want that job. So we are now starting to set up that it's going to go in other directions. But that is, one of the key issues in that the community, I suspect, will be looking at is they're going to look at the figures. They're going to see how the budgeting is going to look when we make this plan, and if they see that a very small amount is going to the expansion of social services and mental health services, they're going to make assumptions, which is sort of natural and understandable that they might, because they don't have all the details, but they know how to look at figures. So just, keep that in mind as we're doing the planning, to make sure that we have all of the gaps filled. It's, and starting with alternate response, of course, that's really terrific and tremendous. And all the work we've done is great. And I really want to see the community know and understand that this is happening and that it's on a pathway towards serious change in criminal justice all across the country. This is not local. It is completely across America. And it's slow. It's going to take time. It's hard. Let's not argue amongst ourselves about this, because I don't think we just really disagree, maybe in numbers or amounts or something like that. But truthfully, everybody's here because they want things to be better. I didn't do this for 10 years so that it would be a worse world or a bad world for law enforcement. My dedication to law enforcement is pretty clear after 5 years on the police chief's commission, advisory commission. I'm connected and I care about our law enforcement. And I know we have very good law enforcement in Whatcom. I've seen it. I know the quality of people we have, but it isn't a perfect system and it does need reform. And we all know this. And that's part of what the fight is on the political picture, which is, I don't want to get off on a side issue, but that is also happening too.
All right, well, you've all just described why and how important this is, and how much work it's going to be. And I thank all of you for being willing to take this extra project on. This isn't just a small project, and being willing to meet with SAC members as the chairs of your subcommittees. It's really going to make a big difference, I think, to have that integration of our IPTRF team in this process. So I thank you all in advance, and it's going to be a lot of work in the next year and a half. So let's move on. We'll go to the GARE implementation strategy. I don't know, Dan, did Mike have something for this? I know he said he was going to be a little bit late.
He's not going to be here for another, I think, 6 minutes or so. I
Yeah.
can take it until he gets here. And pardon me, my voice is going. I had COVID a couple of weeks ago. I'm still kind of recovering from it.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. So basically, I think I'm one of the people that brought this item forward for discussion. What I was trying to get at was, we implemented this racial equity toolkit formally for the task force, but we're not really using it. And I feel like that's just a mistake. So there's two pieces. One, I want to begin implementing it in the policy at the front end of policy recommendations, in the middle of the process of policy recommendations, and at the tail end of whatever we recommend to Whatcom County Council as per our charter. So there's that piece. The other piece is that GARE, as members, as the county is a member of the GARE program, as members, we're entitled to workshops, to one-on-one sessions with experts, subject matter experts, and I think that we should take advantage of those pieces. What we were talking about here before, I didn't chime in purposefully. You guys did a great job in the last discussion, but one of the things that we could be talking about is who is at the table for these discussions, who is impacted by the jail, by behavioral health programs, by literacy programs, whatever ends up being the makeup of this proposal. And we could be doing that through the GARE lens, and we could be getting subject matter experts' opinions on best ways of implementation, so that we're making our decisions through a racial equity lens. And that's what I'm really trying to get at. I just want to formalize that process, and I want us to do that beginning on March 15th at the joint legal and justice systems and behavioral health joint meeting, because I think that I don't think it's too soon. I think it's too late, quite honestly. But I think that we need to begin that process. There are the 6 steps in the racial equity toolkit. We've all had that at our fingertips, or we can get it from Jill or Jackie. This isn't, I don't think it's rocket science. I think it's going to slow our process down a little bit, but I think it's going to be in a good way. And the other piece that I discussed with Stephen yesterday was the data component. We don't know what we don't know what we don't know, but we have to measure stats from the jail, to some extent, PD and sheriff's office arrests, and really have that data at our fingertips. So that I'll stop there. I know Stephen's got his hand up.
Are you talking about the diversity of the staff?
I'm talking about who gets arrested. I'm talking about who's in jail. I'm talking about what happens when people are released from the jail, and what are the impacts on communities of color, people, BIPOC community members. Are they disproportionately affected? I don't know that we know that. And so it would be helpful to know that. But really, it goes back to when we make a recommendation. So for example, when we were talking about electronic home monitoring way back in the day, or crisis stabilization center, we didn't really have much in the way of discussion as to who the impacted individuals were. I mean, I think some of us made assumptions, but as far as, you know, the real data, we didn't look at that. Now we have this toolkit. So I'm just asking that we use it.
Stephen?
Yeah, as Dan said, he and I had a conversation yesterday, and I want to make a concrete proposal. I'm not sure what the right procedure would be to consider it, but it was over a year ago that the task force agreed that we would utilize the racial equity toolkit. And I agree with Dan and really applaud his impatience with our failure to do much with that. I'd like to suggest that we ask Jill to just put together a grid of the 6 toolkit questions, and that we ask all the committee co-chairs and all the task force members that whenever a recommendation is made, that we have filled in the information about those questions that supports the recommendation. And that would become part of the record of the task force's work. It would show good faith compliance with the toolkit, and it would also support our commitment to racial equity that the public could see. And it would just be a concrete expression and a way to remind us that we have to go through this step, because we haven't done it before. I think, frankly, to do this thoroughly, if we're debating option A or option B in a subcommittee, you would analyze both of them, because you want to compare what the better racial equity outcome might be. But at the very least, for something that comes out as a decision, it ought to be grounded in solid answers to the questions that the toolkit presents us. And so I'd like to suggest that we formally adopt that, whether it's as a recommendation to the task force. I'm certainly in support of Dan's suggestion that we start that as soon as possible, and the joint behavioral health, legal and justice systems meeting would be a good place to do that. That's what I got to say.
Well, Jill, what would be your recommendation on how to implement what Stephen's talking about? Do we want to do a motion here and then talk about it in the full task force?
I think the task force has already approved the use of the toolkit. That's already been done. So now it's just a matter of asking the task force members to implement it, correct? And to start using it as it's already been approved. Yeah, is that what you're talking about?
It is, but it would be something concrete that would come to the task force along with the recommendation So it
Right.
would probably become more of a focus of the conversation
Okay.
in considering a recommendation.
So my first question is, practically speaking, the task force makes formal recommendations not very often. Occasionally they're in the annual report, occasionally there's a letter approved to the council. So it might be useful to clarify what you mean by recommendation. There's a lot of discussions and information gathering in the committees and in the task force. So maybe clarifying how it would be applied practically would be useful. I can create a form very easily and distribute it to all the task force members and ask them to use it when they're preparing their presentations to the task force and the committees, and address that component when they are making a presentation. Anyway, those are my first thoughts on the discussion here.
So I use the term recommendations because I think that's the way the toolkit itself frames things. You don't make policy decisions without going through this series of questions. So the task force doesn't make policies, but we do make recommendations. So some formal articulation of our position. That's why I said recommendations. We could use it at any point in our discussions also. And I think if we got in the habit of using it for recommendations, and frankly, I would like to see us be making more recommendations than we have for the past year or two. But if we started that, I think it would become part of our discussion format in a more general way as well.
Right, and I really like the idea of having a document attached to recommendations, any recommendations that are made, as a matter of keeping the record for that. I think that's a great idea. So I just was looking for a little bit of clarification on what I would attach that document to, right? Whether it's to the meeting summaries, whether it's something we send to council. So those are the questions that I still have, but I get where you're going for it. I think it's a great idea.
Caleb.
Thank you. So I do have questions. So, regarding index, I think that we could easily say that data could be gathered in light of racial equity. Practically speaking, I would need to know more specifics about what it is that we would use the toolkit for index. Generically speaking, or I guess in response to Councilmember Hamill's, previous notion of making sure that we're looking at data from the municipalities and the sheriff's office in terms of who's in jail and what sort of calls for service that we're getting in the community. I think that those things we're already trying to do kind of as first steps, and that's sort of a preview of coming attractions coming from the work group that Councilmember Buchanan mentioned earlier, is looking at who's asking for our service, and to the degree that we're able to identifying racial and ethnic characteristics and makeups of that population, and to what degree we have people in custody that we can say specifically what their membership is in racial and ethnic lines. The challenge that we have is kind of big picture. When we look at data, there's two kinds of issues in terms of racial reporting. There's reporting that people assume, and then there's reporting that people declare. So if there's an interaction, say, a law enforcement officer's interacting with an individual and they assume somebody's race, is different than necessarily what they identify or they declare. And so we will find some discrepancies in our databases across the criminal justice system as a result of that sort of difference in the way people report race versus they're assumed. So, but that's, again, I'm looking for direction more than anything, but absolutely willing to put in work to make sure that we're meeting a format, or when we go to look for requests for information, that we're using a GARE as a lens. I just don't know exactly what that looks like. So I'm willing to listen on that front.
Caleb, I was trying to take a piece of Dan's broader concern, which I happen to share, and propose something concrete as a beginning step, a partial step. I'm not trying to have the data discussion right now. I'm trying to have a process discussion. I don't know that there will be a lot of recommendations coming out of Index, but if you're thinking with those questions in mind, for instance, I'm not expecting Index to have a lot of public engagement from the community on the work that you're trying to put together there necessarily. But if you're thinking about building a data system that has to allow the rest of us to answer those questions, that might shape where you head with some of those questions. So that's all I'm trying to do, is to set out some bumpers for us as we move forward in some of this work.
Yeah, and that's good stuff. I just think that in terms of recommendation, we might recommend that, you know, this policy decision has had this effect. We might recommend that this, you know, data set shows trends in this direction or trends in that direction. And I think those are as much, you know, recommendation as Index could get, but I think that those are super informative in terms of what's going on in the criminal justice system. So that's again, I'm willing to move in that effort if again, given the right bumpers, as you're saying.
Raylene?
Thank you. Going back to what Dan was saying is, you know, what's in the jail and what has it been, you know, looking at the equity and the culture and then ethnicity. I also go back to Wendy's presentation of who's in the jail right now. And I don't know the exact number without going back to the notes, but I want to say it was like 206 felonies on pretrials. And one of the numbers was like 11 for misdemeanors. And a lot of those misdemeanors were actually there on felonies as well. So trying to separate that information, which comes back to what I was talking to earlier when Mr. Sadhu made the comment of needing stuff for jail. Some officers are actually putting blinders on and they're not contacting individuals because they know that they can't do anything with them. Some of those defendants aren't getting booked into jail. One of the officers asked me the other day why it didn't show up on his criminal history that he had 4 convictions for DUIs in the past. And I said, because if they're not getting booked, they're not getting fingerprinted, and that's not getting reported to WASC and CIC. So I know, Stephen, you said you didn't want to go too deep into the data portion, but if we want to establish what is there and what the trends are moving forward, we also have to take into consideration that the jail's current facility isn't allowing us to put people in there that normally would be incarcerated. So we are going to have to look at data for those that are arrested, cited, and released, and they've never been booked and they've never had the fingerprints. So we're going to be missing some of that culture and ethnicity. Also, something that I've seen trending recently is sexual orientation is changing on citations. So we're not getting to be able to link the information like we used to when it said this person had so much of a history, because sometimes the systems aren't letting us show that this person was a male before and now they're a female because of their different identifiers. Thank you.
Raylene, I didn't mean that I didn't care about the data. I meant that I was trying to sequentially attack these connected questions. And I think if we adopted something like I was proposing, it would drive the data needs and the data that we start to gather. Those are all absolutely relevant questions. We need to understand those. Dan's right, you're right. I was trying to make a smaller proposal.
Dan?
Yeah, so I don't want to get too caught up in the outcomes part of the discussion, Because I think there's, like Jill said, we're not making, a ton of recommendations to county council. A lot of what we do is discussion, information gathering, building of knowledge base. For example, so our next meeting, we've got competency restoration, current use data on the Crisis Stabilization Center and reentry services, as well as updating the sequential intercept model. Those are all processes. We probably won't have a lot in the way of outcomes as a result of those discussions. But if we're applying the GARE toolkit to those discussions, what does that look like? That's what I'm trying to get at. That's going to be the bulk of what we do through our work is, we might update the sequential intercept model and make a recommendation to the task force. It's probably not going to go to the council, but it will go to the broader task force. As far as reentry services, what does the application of those 6 steps look like when it comes to people who are impacted, people who are at the table, people who are not at the table, making decisions in effect on other people's lives. So that's what I'm trying to get at. And it's making sausage, man. It's really the grind of policy decisions. It's the grind of how do we do these things in an effective way, and how do we apply the racial equity toolkit to it. I realize that we're going to have holes in our data from Spillman, from Gelada, long arm. We just will, from courts. I get that, but let's do the best we can in terms of applying that toolkit, and let's find out where those gaps are so we can try to better address that. That's where I'm coming from. And I apologize, the piano tuner guy is here tuning the piano. So if you hear the piano in the background, that's not me. Clearly, I can't play that thing. So that's what happens when you work in a cocktail bar.
Don't ever apologize, Dan, for tuning your piano. I'm totally in
No.
favor of that.
An out of tune piano, even on Zoom, is bad. So Jill, do you have direction on how to proceed here? Do you feel?
Direction that I've heard for me is to create a grid, which I can easily do and am happy to do that.
What would be nice is if we came up with something that was broad enough to be able to be used by more than just the IPTRF. We need to get this into the council and how the council uses racial equity lens in making decisions on lots of policy issues. So I think, since the county is member of GARE, that we have a responsibility in the council to be able to use the toolkit as well. So I would like to be able to kill a lot of birds with one stone here. And yes, we needed something for ourselves to use, but we also, I think, need to be thinking of the bigger picture and make sure that we're implementing GARE into all the corners of the county government that needs to go. And the council is obviously a very important one. So I hope that we can kind of move parallel on that to a degree and come up with a method and a process for the council to use.
Yeah,
Stephen?
Barry, I can certainly share what we've talked about here and the grid that we come up with Dana and schedule that for a staff meeting if you'd like, for us to discuss amongst staff how we might handle process-wise some of these things and maybe make some recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Stephen?
Thanks, Barry. So I have 2 questions. One is I just want to hear expressly that we have consensus on using this kind of tool to implement the toolkit. I see a lot of nodded heads, so it looks like we do. And maybe Jill, you can reflect that or Barry, you can reflect that when you report to the task force. Secondly, going way back to Dan's initial comments, I heard Jed Holmes reporting differently on the county's GARE membership. I heard him say that it did not apply to boards and commissions, that we would not have access to membership opportunities, which I found disappointing, but also motivating because it means we got to do this ourselves. So if the council wants to expand this consensus we just have, that's great. I don't have any portfolio for doing the council's work, but I do for the task force, and I want to make sure we're doing that. I'd just like to understand what other people understood from Jed about what benefits we might gain as a task force for the county's GARE membership. I think we made that recommendation, urged the county to consider that with the thought that we would benefit from it, but I thought I heard that we would not.
Jack?
Jill probably has better information than me, if she wants to go first.
Okay, go ahead, Jill.
Sure, I just wanted to provide a little insight on what Jed said. Having signed up with GARE, in order to sign up to use their membership, you have to have the email address, like the county email address. So jnixon@co.whatcom.wa.us in order to sign up and access, right? To create your password and your username. And so it's not that the county's refusing to let boards and commissions members access those materials. It's that unless our IT department starts issuing county email addresses to boards and commission members, which it's not going to do, there really isn't a mechanism to allow them to do that. I emailed out to those task force members who are also county employees a little bit of a how-to in terms of GARE and using its resources. And I did this, I think, a couple months ago or a month or two ago. So most of the task force members, or many of them, I won't say most, many of them do have access to using the GARE membership. Anyway, I just wanted to clarify that it's more of a technical sign up with GARE issue, not necessarily the county refusing.
Jack?
Yeah, and my hand was up more on the consensus piece. Although, Jill, you made me reflect when I was a CASA guardian ad litem, I had a county email address. So maybe there are ways, or I was even thinking, Stephen, perhaps the IPRTF task force co-chairs, there could be an email address assigned to that function it's for. There might be something if we really needed it. But really what I wanted to say on the GARE thing, while I'm in consensus in general, I think it would be a mistake for the task force to see itself as extraordinarily unique. In other words, if the county is already going to plan something for GARE that will work for all the other boards and commissions, well, I'm very respectful, Dan, and empathetic of your desire to see this done. And I agree, we don't want it to just languish and not do anything. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And if the county is going to take this on, I think it's wise to just, we serve at the discretion of the county council. We are there to advise them. And I don't know that we have to do something extraordinarily unique for us. So I think being updated on if something's happening could be very useful and save this task force having to do that work and just complying with whatever the system becomes. Thanks.
Hey, Jill, you gave me a thought when you talked about the requirement being a county email address. If, for instance, if the planning commission had, there was a workshop through GARE that was of interest to the planning commission, would the staff person assigned to the planning commission be able to host that workshop for that group? Is there another way to use our staff in one avenue anyway, to be able to get workshops for members of those boards or commissions?
That's a really good question, and I will look into it. I don't have an answer to that.
Stephen?
Barry, thank you. I was having the same question in my mind, so that'll be an interesting bit of research for Jill. In regard to Jack's comments, I didn't mean, Jack, to suggest that we just kick aside any connection to the county membership. I guess the other disappointing thing that I got out of Jed's presentation was the extraordinarily long time frame that government processes have for implementing something like this. So I heard him saying months and months and months and interdepartmental negotiation. I just want to get going on this. I don't want to be tied to that. I don't want to be counter to it. And if something comes up that works across the board, then I think we ought to be consistent with that. But I don't want to wait on that, a la Dan's original point, to get started.
Thanks, Stephen. And it would be very rare for an occasion for me to be in favor of long government timelines, probably of anyone on the screen. So I'm with you.
All right, anything else on GARE? Mike, you've joined us. Welcome. Do you have any thoughts for us? We were talking about, how to have a process for, specifically, we were talking to begin with how the task force could use the GARE toolkit in looking at and make some sort of a checklist or something that we would use as a evaluation tool for our work. So that's kind of what we've been discussing. And I know you've probably got a lot of thoughts on GARE, so.
Well, I do, and I got a text from Dan that kind of caught me up. So apologies on being late. I had 2 meetings scheduled at the exact same time, and if I could have duplicated myself, I would. So it sounds really exciting. I think one of the things, and if you already hit this, please let me know. And this may be to Stephen's point. One of the advantages I think of GARE is participation. So there is a certain amount of items, toolkits, collateral that's created on their website, and I understand that county staff have access to that currently through our membership. But I think to me, and one of the things that was attractive about GARE in the first place is membership and is connecting and is cohort. And I don't know if you've already touched on this, but there are numerous cohorts. And one of them, for example, was on the financial obligations, right? Or LFOs, or in general, financial obligations created in criminal justice systems. Those, things like that could be very useful to task force members that want to go down that rabbit hole, right? And we have talked on our own, is that something that we include for the task force, and in what way, shape, and form? So if you haven't already, I'd be curious about access, not only to like through a portal or to their website resources, but maybe even more importantly to to some of the cohorts. Did you all already hit that, Barry? And
we started talking a little bit about that. I think you've taken it a little deeper in that, which is cool. So
I brought up that one that's of particular interest because I think that's an area that the task force was starting to scratch on. And if I remember, Jack actually had a point for our annual report, and we kind of talked a little bit about financial obligations. That's just one example of topic areas. So I think, that could be useful too. It's a different type of access, right? It's more like, getting in with those other groups and finding out what their schedule is and getting connected. So if there isn't information about that, I guess that would be my question. Then, and Jill, I don't know if you know that information off your head or if that's something that we would need to research. Okay.
I need to look into it.
Okay. And then the other thing that I would offer is, I don't know if you've already discussed this, Barry, and all, if there's a kind of a county staff person who's kind of leading the charge with that. I would be happy to assist if you all are going to turn that checklist and trying to create it in a tool. If I can be of use as another brain to bounce that off of or something, I'd be happy to do that and assist in that matter.
thanks, Mike. I appreciate that offer. I think we'll probably take you up on that. Perry.
No, I'm not sure how helpful it is, but just listening, and I've just really appreciated the discussion throughout today. I'm proud to be a part of the group. One thought strikes me that's similar to the importance and significance of the land acknowledgement statement, that GARE and at least the essential components that in at least particular meetings a reference to that this is a context and then obviously, some of the information that could be a component of that as well for really an awareness raising or acknowledgement, again, process in maybe specific meetings, the subcommittees, et cetera, because it's obviously of equal importance. I mean, we're really talking about a very similar item when we are going through the land acknowledgement statements as we are with GARE. So there's my thoughts.
All right, anything else on GARE? It's a great discussion, everybody. Thanks. Okay, we'll move on to the updating of the sequential intercept model. So Jill, are you leading that discussion or?
No, but I've got a couple of thoughts and questions on that. Harry, Mary, you offered at a recent past meeting to take the sequential intercept to your service providers. I don't know if you've had a chance to do that yet.
I
Yeah,
have not,
Barry?
sorry, the meeting has not occurred yet, but we are certainly prepared to do that. And if I can, Barry had made reference to this, that through the support of Erica Lautenbach, we do have our first meeting scheduled to do a review of the SIM and the individuals that are involved in it. We kept that group fairly small to do some initial work of, knowledgeable individuals. That's scheduled next Wednesday and for continuing Wednesdays at the same time frame. I'm sure that we're going to get some guidance from Barry and possibly others, and just a detail of what we're after here beyond simply the knowledge of the behavioral health programs and services that exist and where the gaps and needs are and some of those components. And then also simultaneously expanding out and utilizing my idea in terms of our behavioral health crisis response meeting that we have about 140 individuals that are on the distribution list that are providers, stakeholders in the behavioral health services, that we would also gather information from them, just in regards to possible arenas and et cetera that we'd miss. So that is set up and scheduled, and I absolutely intend on, I can't remember the exact date here, but it's very soon that we have our behavioral health crisis response systems community meeting that's facilitated by the health department.
Thanks, Perry. Raylene?
Thank you. Looking at the Intercept 2 with programs in place, I'd like to touch on the pretrial services group. We haven't had a report from them in a while. I believe that was kind of a limited program on funding, what they're doing, what they haven't been doing, what should be done. And I don't know if we need a report to just the legal injustice, or if we want to have that to the full task force, because I don't even know that we really have any data on it. I recently saw a pretrial order out of Superior Court that actually had ankle bracelet through GPS monitoring on an individual, but it didn't have anything to do with the pretrial services unit. And I was kind of surprised to see that, because it's the first one I've ever seen come out of Superior Court. So yeah, I was kind of wondering.
One thing that I did was email all of the IPRTF members mid-February, asking everyone to take a look at the old sequential intercepts, and then email me with any updates that needed to be included on it. And I did not hear back from anyone. So I really think that to update the sequential intercept, time is going to have to be dedicated in either the committees or the full task force for everyone to just sit down and go through it and brainstorm there in the moment. So I guess my question then for next steps would be, do you want me to take it to the individual committees first? Should we just do a big brainstorming section in the full task force? Some of the task force members aren't in committees. How would you like to move forward with this update?
Well, I think this update is going to come from a few different directions. I think it's going to come from obviously the process you talked about, Jill, and that's the task force itself. But there's going to be a lot of work done through this behavioral health gap analysis team that Perry just referenced. That's going to be a major tool for them to use, and going forward, I think it's going to become something that's going to be super valuable to provide for the public. And I've got some thoughts on that I'm still trying to finalize, but I think there's a number of ways that we're going to get input to update it. And I think both the internal processes of our task force and then the external work that we're doing with the SAC is going to drive these updates. Dan?
So we have that as an agenda item for the 15th for the joint meeting. And so I guess my question is, and so that's half the committees right there. That's 2 out of the 4. So that can happen there. My question is, are we updating points 0 through 5? Are we just updating like what we have now in terms of service provision, what we still need, or we have parts of, are we updating those 3 kind of categories, or are we updating, are we going to be talking about going backwards a little bit, or not backwards, or upstream? That's a better way to say it, in terms of like, are we going to do a -1? Are we going to do a -2? What do those look like? I mean, how far do you want to go on that? I mean, you could go all the way back to like the children's initiative that's being proposed for voters for this November as a long-term means of incarceration prevention. So I think that those questions need to be settled, because otherwise we could take on the entirety of human suffering, for lack of a better term, and try to fix it. We're not going to be able to do that. So where do we stop? If we're not going upstream, fine. If we're doing more of a gap analysis and asset mapping, cool. I just need to know direction in terms of what the expectations from the group would be, because I might have a different perspective on it.
I think that's an important question. I look at this document not as it gets one more update and then it's cast in stone. I look at it as a living document that grows with our programs and the things, the ideas for new programs come up. So I would love to include a lot of the upstream stuff. I guess we just got to figure out a way to put parameters around it and decide, how far do we go? But because I think I agree with you, Dan. I think a lot of those upstream things are very key to our work and are important to identify. Mike?
2 thoughts. I was wondering, I know it was actually some discussion around it, but I think we kind of adopted an Intercept 0. And I'm wondering, Dan, if that kind of addresses that. Those are things obviously before somebody necessarily enters the system. And I thought we used an Intercept 0 as a way to talk about upstream work, but I'm curious if that doesn't fit, or if you think that it's maybe too narrow. That was just one thought. And the second one is escaping me, and it's going to come right back. Oh, I remember what it was. I was curious about just the makeup, because I think Jill has an excellent point that in order for task force members to dig into it, they kind of have to see what's there. They have to ruminate on it, and they probably need a little bit of just time carved out of an agenda. And my understanding of our combined joint meeting with legal and justice and behavioral health is those agendas are always so packed. I was curious from Perry, who's going to be organizing, or at least be part of this whole gap analysis. Is it sufficiently different players? If it is, it would be really valuable then for the task force, maybe as Dan has mentioned, through subcommittees, or maybe the task force as a whole, to dig into that, because you'll get different feedback. If there seems to be a lot of similarity between players, like people that are participating in the group, Perry, that you mentioned with Lautenbach and others, if there's a big crossover, we might not get a ton of value. So I guess what's your opinion on that, Perry? Do you think that the groups are distinct enough that it's really worth that time?
Well, at this point, again, approaching it as a smaller group to do, I think, an initial review and update of programs that are known, and maybe less so in terms of projecting into programs that are needed from specific subject matter experts, that sort of thing. Who we've included right now is Melora Christensen, Jackie Mitchell, Mike Parker, Thomas McAuliffe, who is the lead supervisor, Joe Fuller, who is oriented towards prevention, has been with the health department for a number of years, and Gail DeHoog. And at least my understanding, although I certainly didn't discuss this with anybody, I know that Barry and Erica were going to talk to us, I think, in the initial meeting about sort of framing up some components as well. But the way that I was holding it was with the knowledge that group has at this point in time, making certain that things that are referenced there are updated, just in terms of is there something else that has occurred since the last updating of this document? And as much as possible also from the subject matter experts in terms of behavioral health services that are available and those kinds of components to also update that. And there may be more expectations because again, I haven't spoken specifically in regard to this that Barry or Erica might have had. And then almost simultaneously, initially and understanding kind of what we've accomplished, but then simultaneously beginning to take a look at where else do we need to go and take this. And the thought strikes me as we're discussing things and maybe somebody has, some thoughts about, okay, then we're really going to need a centralized document to ensure that the various entities that we're talking about here, their information, the work that they've done is documented someplace, and that hasn't been discussed either. So hopefully I answered the question, Mike.
No, you did. And I wonder, and this question, I guess is to Dan, but really to everybody, that since we know that work is happening, it's got quite a few experts. What if we stage it? The suggestion maybe take it to that group, which really could fill out a lot of the gaps. And then we would have a very updated new for 2022 sequential intercept model, then take that to whatever you all decide, whether the task force at the whole, and we could create a presentation around it and highlight the things that have been added, cover the things that have been removed, and really more facilitate than the task force's input in a facilitated session. And there would be less to do because a lot more meat would be on the bones from this group. And I just wonder what folks think about that.
Jill?
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for that. If that's something the group wants to do, I'm wondering if maybe Perry wants to give that update to both committees at the joint meeting next week, because the sequential intercept is an agenda item there. So if that's the route you guys want to go, then that would be great. I don't know if this is helpful, Dan, to your comments about putting boundaries on how far upstream we go, but when the steering committee addressed this question in 2018, we came up with a statement that is included on, I don't know if you guys remember this, the project proposal form that I created for new projects. And that statement says that for a proposed project, the outcomes and intentions of the program are to reduce incarceration or the likelihood of involvement with the criminal justice system versus prevention from unhealthy outcomes in general. Prevention efforts should be considered through the lens of incarceration rather than cataloging all community activities. I just wanted to remind you guys of that.
Thanks, Jill. Dan?
Let's see. To answer Mike's question is, does zero, I don't think zero on the sequential intercept model encapsulates what Jill was just describing fully. I think it's part of it, but it's not all of it. And what you just read, Jill, to me, I could make an argument that, well, we should focus on education. We need to focus on pre-K, because that really, you can tie a string and make a straight line to the Sally port in the jail from for a kid that doesn't have those supports. But that, to me, it's almost like it's too much. And there are other groups that are working. There's a separate children's group that, and I'm on that group, that is working towards an initiative, like I said, this November. So where does it end I guess is what I'm trying to figure out. As far as it goes with next week, updating the SIM, I think Perry needs to be, I don't want to volunteer you, Perry, but I'm going to try here. I think Perry's group is key to understanding the SIM, and it's an update and refresh for all of us in terms of what we have some of and what we need in this county. So yeah, I guess I feel like if Perry's not the presenter next week, we're going to be completely out of order, because we need that. And to some degree, we will be out of order because we need that group's feedback to help us to prepare a better SIM. And on upstream stuff, I don't think we're settled. I do not feel settled on what that looks like, because there's so many influencing factors. Mike and I had this discussion yesterday over a beer about the cost of incarceration. And we talked about, $200 a night in Whatcom County Jail. Behavioral health treatments can be up to 10 times that amount. But if you look at the true costs on society, as Mike was bringing up last night, those costs flatten right out. And it's actually more expensive to incarcerate than it is to treat. And so, we need to have those discussions. And as importantly, we're going to be doing this discussion next week in front of however many SAC members show up. So this is our opportunity to really shine here and to really put forth the knowledge that we have in a balanced way. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Dan. Arlene?
Whenever we've talked about prevention, and we've talked about it a number of times in steering and in other places, and I'm thinking about the community conversations that I've heard, people are very interested in prevention. They really want to see that happen. In actual action, I understand that Alicia has been supporting a bill in the state legislature for increasing the number of school counselors available, which of course is one of the safety nets of being able to catch problems early. But then the next step would be to make it easily available to have family counseling, easily available, just as easy as having a counselor in the school, because it's the next step to trying to solve those problems before they turn into criminal behavior, addiction behavior, and so forth. So there's a great deal of interest in this. And I understand the complexity of adding it to the sequential intercept. I mean, we're basically trying to do everything in the universe here. And on the one hand, it seems like it should be limited, but on the other, everything matters. This is what we've talked about before, that the social services available are a web of connections, all of which hold the web together. Missing parts, it breaks and people fall through, right? So I'm in favor of supporting the largest amount of services possible and the ones that matter the most. And we do know some of that. We don't know all of it, because when you're making change, there's an experimental quality to some of it.
Okay, I think we'll do one more. We'll do Stephen, and then we should move on. We only have about 6 minutes left. So Stephen?
I'll just say, I think the existence of the SAC and looking at the gaps is really critical, because I've always stumbled with the sequential intercept model. We list things that are there, but we have no sense of whether they really are an unbroken continuum of services in that level of the intercept model. So I think our focus on those gaps is really critical. I'm also impressed over the last year or two that as the task force's work drills down more into what's going on here, things that we never would have thought were important turned out to be absolutely critical. The idea of navigators, the idea of supportive housing to make Grace and Lead really more effective, or drug court more effective. Those don't show up in a more superficial analysis. So I don't know how to include those things that we're finding out are actually linchpins to successful outcomes for people, but I don't think many of them are reflected on our current version of the sequential intercept model. And so I don't know, I just ask that we all think about what we're learning and how to incorporate that into that as well.
Yeah, that's really a good point, Stephen. All right, we have just two quick things, I think, to go, and that's the 2022 annual report to the council and executive. So you're talking about the June, July, right, Jill?
Yes, I don't know if you have your packets in front of you. The time is now to start planning for that. I will schedule in the April committees an agenda item for each one of you to talk about what you want your committee reports to be. And then April and probably early May will be the time to start writing the first drafts for all of those. So just be aware of that. I typed up a quick outline for what some of the topics could be. We're not gonna have time to discuss it today, so I'll try to connect with each of you as chairs later after the meeting to talk about that.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Any questions on that? Stephen?
Jill, I think our prior year's practice is that we would have a first draft to the committees for their May meeting to discuss.
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, we have items for our next task force agenda.
I don't have any notes for the next meeting, so what would you like scheduled?
Seems like this GARE discussion should be, we should be talking about that. How to formulate a process. What do you think? What's everybody think about that? Could we have any kind of a outline or a framework of a draft process by then, Jill, do you think?
Yeah, if Stephen, if you could meet with me at some point in the next week or two, and you can really tell me what your vision is and get us on the same page, and then maybe bring Mike into that as well to formulate a first draft to present to the task force. Is that something that the two of you can help me with? Great, thank you.
Sure. And I'm not thinking of anything fancy dancy or anything either.
Okay, any other ideas of what we want to talk about at our next full task force meeting?
It sounds like maybe the sequential intercept. We do have some people that don't attend the joint, for example. And maybe, I mean, obviously it won't happen in time for our joint meeting, which is the day before Perry's first gathering of the August group. But by the time of our whole task force meeting, we might have some updates. So I think including that, if you all agree, could be valuable. And I think from Jill's comment, like presentation / brainstorm, like tee it up and go through it again, explain it, and then see if we could solicit.
What about, we tried to do a legislative update last meeting and we couldn't get anybody here. Should we try to do that again?
Yes.
Okay. We'll put out a call to our 42nd and 40th legislators and see what we can arrange.
Oh, Barry, did you mean with the legislators or with the individuals we called on? Because I thought if we're going to call on individuals in the task force, they need more advance notice. That seemed obvious from the facilitation of that meeting.
I think I'm talking, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right, Jack. I was thinking more the component that was missing last time. That was we had invited, I think Representative Shoemake and Rule to come and they just couldn't fit it in because of everything going on down Olympia. So
Great, if they can come, that would be great. I do think though, if we try to ad lib like we did before, we've got to give more. I mean, there was some good discussion, but we've got to let people know ahead of time better.
yeah. Dan?
Yeah, I was not prepared last time at all to talk about ledge stuff. So session ends today, it's my understanding. So they should be free to attend even briefly the next task force meeting. So I would support a ledge update. And then I also want to talk about how to incorporate the SAC and further committee meetings and I don't know if they need to be at the regular task force meeting. I don't know what people think about that, but it's certainly at committee meetings. In particular, well, I mean, I'm going to, you know, advocate for behavioral health but also legal and justice, and then perhaps crisis stabilization and data too, maybe all of them. But I want to understand how we are going about incorporating those members, what it is we're trying to do, because we only have so many opportunities to meet with those folks between now and when a campaign will start at some point next year. And so I just want to be strategic on that. We're going to get this one shot again in November of next year, and I don't know what happens if it fails. Do we wait 5 years? What happens then? Do we go to Skagit County and beg to use their facility? I mean, this is probably one of the most consequential things that this task force will have influence on over the next 16, 18 months. So I want to be intentional about it, and I want to make sure that we do it right.
I couldn't agree more, Dan. Jill?
Thank you. I'm hearing two conflicting pieces of feedback as far as legislative updates. March or not March. I can try to schedule it for the April meeting and invite the legislators there at that time. Or would you rather have me try to get them to the March meeting?
I think we're talking about the March meeting.
Okay. And who is going to lead that conversation if they aren't going to be able to attend?
I don't know. What do you guys think? Just bail on the whole subject, because that did get awkward when they couldn't come and we had to kind of like Jack said, we had to ad lib.
Well,
Take it off the agenda if they can't be there. Do you agree, Stephen?
That's what I think too. Yeah.
No, I guess I see it differently. I see ideally a two-part discussion. One is Representative Rule and Shoemake, and then some commentary from Sheriff Elfo, Eric Ritchie, Flo, if she wants. Chief Tank is on a state law enforcement task force dealing with legislative issues. I'd like to know whether the changes that will have passed, how they bounce off of some of the concerns that were expressed over the last year. So if we can't have the representatives, we can still have the institutional perspectives on some of those changes from some of our task force members. That's what I would go to.
Yeah, I think we could do that. Just how did it go for you with the things you talked about? So,
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would work. But again, we've got to give them like a week's notice.
Absolutely.
The meeting's the 21st. We're already, we're right. So we're at the 10th. So we would need to reach out Monday. Okay.
Jill, doable?
I'll be reaching out today. Yeah.
Okay, we got to wrap this up because I have a meeting with Caleb starting at 1, and I need to meet about this RFP with Jack and Stephen and Tyler. So let's go to Arlene. Make it real quick, please.
Yeah, just two things. Is anybody thinking about any kind of public hearing so that we can get feedback from the community, people with lived experience and so forth? Are we getting that participation going?
That's all part of the public participation plan that we're going to be working on.
So in the future is what you're saying?
Yeah, right. Near future.
Okay.
Okay. I guess we do have public comment. Is there anyone out there, Jill, that wants to speak to us?
We have one attendee today. If you'd like to speak to the committee, please virtually raise your hand now. And no hands are raised. For the selection committee who's meeting right after this, I have just sent you a Zoom link. Give me about a minute to close out this meeting and open that one. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you at 1, Caleb.
Thanks, everyone.